people that put this system in place now seem to be behind the scenes. So there's not a face on this destruction. There's not a face on this evil, but the system that those faces created is well and alive. And we have to, we just have to come together if we ever want to see like systemic change. Well, the uprising, the unrest, the uprising, other people call it riots, but here it's a unrest and an uprising because of the amount of social injustice that has been done over the years. But what took place was very similar to what a boycott would have done, and a boycott is pretty much, the ciphering or the curbing of any financial gain that comes from businesses. So there was a professional baseball game that took place that didn't allow any fans to be admitted into the game. So there were just two professional teams playing baseball during the regular season, but to an empty stadium. That hurt the city as far as money and marketing went. There was a curfew that was put in place, 10 p.m. every night. Usually people who wanted to hang out and go to bars and restaurants and movies after 10 p.m. or even at 9 o'clock, they couldn't go. So that hurt. And then there was a huge boxing match that much of the world was looking forward to, which was Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather. And many of the bars that would have attracted people to come watch that fight could not show the fight because the fight came on after 10 o'clock. Everybody had to be in the house in Baltimore City at 10 o'clock. So that hurt. And a lot of people probably went to D.C. to watch the fight, or they went out to the county to watch the fight. So it hit the city in their pockets financially in some kind of way, shape, or form. The only thing is that a boycott would still be people would still be boycotting right now if there was an actual, boycott, more than likely, if they hadn't reached. They can't really say there was a goal, right? The uprising, the unrest that happened, it was a bunch of pressure bottled up, and it had to pop. It had to explode. Like, if it didn't happen then, it was going to happen soon because of what's been taking place in the city for so long. So that was bound to happen regardless. I can't really say those goals, like what happened, were what they were trying to obtain or attain.
I think when we talk about hip hop, we have to make a distinction. There's hip hop culture, and then there's the hip hop industry. It's two totally different things. You know what I'm saying? So what I represent is the culture. And what's the culture? It's the DJ, it's the MC, it's dance, it's the graffiti art, graffiti writing, and it's knowledge, it's the beatboxer, it's fashion, it's language. These are the different elements of hip hop. I just named 8 elements of hip hop culture. And ever since I was a youth coming up, these things were always a part of my life, because my mother, the older generations, they had funk, they had jazz, they had the blues and spirituals and disco and rock and roll and soul and all those things. And hip hop was the first culture that young people coming out of the civil rights era in America created that was specifically for ourselves. And it's also the first technologically driven culture that we've ever created as black people. My friends, a lot of my homies, they're music producers. They make their music. They can make their music on this computer. They can make their music on this iPhone. There's in the past you needed an instrument. You know what I mean? Hip hop, 2 turntables, a microphone. An amplifier. You know what I'm saying? An 808. Just basic technological stuff. Why did that happen? Because in America, in the late 60s into the 70s and into the 80s, in poor communities, because poor people created hip hop. Poor black Americans, poor West Indians, and poor Latinos in New York City created hip hop culture. Well, the art programs were cut. There was a financial crisis happening, so a lot of kids didn't have access to learning how to play instruments. They didn't have art classes, so they took what they had in front of them. This is what poor people do. We make something out of nothing. That's a real basic definition of hip hop as well. Make something out of nothing and win on your own terms. And little did we know in the 1970s going into the 1980s that this culture that we created out of nothing would be the dominant youth culture for the last 40 years everywhere in the world. Like everywhere I go, there's hip hop. And it's incredible to me, you know. And so that's the culture that we're talking about that has resonated with young people everywhere. Now, unfortunately, over the last 20 years or so, and you can look around and you see in my house the covers of Vibe magazine. These are covers when I was a founding staff member of Vibe magazine that was created by Quincy Jones and Time Warner back in the 90s. At that time, you know, there was a realization, okay, this culture has exploded. You got Yo MTV Raps on MTV, you got BET's Rap City. We need to have magazines that document the culture as well. The Source was created, Vibe was created. And, you know, we didn't call things gangster rap, we just said it's hip hop. Like there was a wide range of stuff. You had Queen Latifah, you had Public Enemy, you had 2 Live Crew, you know, with the sexually explicit stuff. But you also had, you know, you had NWA, you had Big Daddy Kane, you had MC Lyte, you had Salt and Pepper. It was a wide range of voices. But something happened in the mid 1990s where the diversity and the balance in the music started to be stripped away, and you started to see coming out of America an overemphasis on the N-word, an overemphasis on disrespecting and disregarding and even hating women, a disrespect for, even more disrespect for the gay community, disrespect for intellectualism and an overemphasis on materialism. You know what I mean? People talking about their cars and their clothes more than ever. Now, have we always talked about it in hip hop? Yeah, I got cassettes from the 70s and 80s. Poor people don't want to be poor, so we're going to talk about the stuff that we want. But all of a sudden, that became the dominant thing. The overemphasis on drugs and alcohol and partying. You know what I'm saying? And if you look at the #1 hip hop album over the last 20 years, every single year, the #1 album in America has had an overuse of the N-word, the most horrific things said about women, alcohol, drugs, partying, nothing serious at all half the time. You know what I mean? Not until, you know, really until Kendrick Lamar's new album, To Pimp a Butterfly, is such a departure, you know, because it's well-rounded. It's balanced, you know what I mean? That's what's been missing. No one's saying that we don't like party music. I love party music, you know what I mean? But the industry, hip-hop culture, was co-opted by the industry, and the industry took away all the elements of the culture and just reduced it down to the rapper. Like all the other stuff doesn't even matter. The DJ doesn't matter. You know, the graffiti doesn't matter. Dance doesn't matter. Knowledge doesn't matter. The beatboxer doesn't matter. You know, knowing yourself, you know, all that stuff got taken away. And this dumbing down is so deep. When I went to Africa for the first time a couple years ago, I'm in my hotel room the first night. I turned on the TV. Who's on the TV? Lil Wayne. You know what I mean? N-I-G-G, you know, the N-word all over the place. I'm like, man, this is crazy. Everywhere you go, this is what's being put out there. And we got to understand that when you talk about institutionalized racism, one of the ways that institutionalized racism continues to perpetuate itself, continues to win, is when it takes the worst of who we are and puts it out there more than anything else, over and over and over again. I always tell young people, spend a week listening to the hip-hop R&B station every day and look how they don't even bleep out the curses anymore. And then spend the next week listening to the top 40 stations in every single in your market, and notice you don't hear any curses. You don't even hear any. You hear the clean versions of everything. You know what I'm saying? Why is that? That's intentional, in my opinion. And so that's what's happened to hip-hop. And so what young people need to understand in Brazil and everywhere else in the world is that, you know, I love hip-hop. I am hip-hop. I grew up a b-boy, a dancer. I was a break dancer. I was a house music dancer. I was a graffiti writer. My nickname is Keep01, K-E-P-O-1. That was my tag. I was a founding staff member of Vibe magazine. I produced the very first exhibit on hip-hop culture and its history in this country with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This is a huge part of my life. I'm always going to be a hip-hop head. But what I'm not going to support is self-hatred and self-sabotage and death. You know, because that's what it ultimately becomes. If you call yourself an N-I-G-G-A over and over again, that says you're accepting death. You're accepting the inferiority that's been put on you. You're accepting the mediocrity that's put on you. You know, that's saying that you don't care about your history. You don't even know where this word came from. You're just using it because you're a robot. You're a follower. You're not a leader. You know what I'm saying? And that's what the industry of hip hop has done to the culture of hip hop. And we need to tell the truth about that. It's corrupted this culture and turned it into something that's just about money and instant gratification and disrespect of ourselves, again, of the women and girls in our communities. And if you don't learn about yourself in the school system, you know, and hip hop culture, the industry is the way that you get your information, you are going to be very ignorant. Very, very ignorant. And you're going to say ignorant stuff and do ignorant stuff over and over again. Did hip hop create sexism? No. The world was sexist way before hip hop. But because it's a form of pop culture, it helps to spread it. You know what I mean? It helps to, did hip hop create violence? No. But it spreads it. It becomes a tool to spread it. So the question we got to ask, are you a part of the culture of hip hop, or are you a part of the industry? Because the culture is about life. The industry is about death. I want to be alive.
You know, when she first came to America, you know, she didn't really have an education, and not even, they weren't giving jobs to black people anyway, you know, so she had to make money, and this is the way many people have made money, you know, and they were able to, you know, better themselves or whatever, and provide for their families and buy houses and send their kids to college and do all this other stuff, you know, so it's not like generation after generation does this work, you know. It's happening everywhere, you know, and people, I was gentrified out of Brooklyn, so I get it. You know what I'm saying? I was born and raised in Brooklyn, and then all of a sudden, you know, there are people coming from the Midwest, like, you know, from Tennessee or whatever. It's like they're like living next door, and then I have to move because it's too expensive, you know? And, you know, it is what it is. Everybody needs to live somewhere. You know what I'm saying? You can't say, oh, they can't come and live here. You know, they can go live anywhere they want. And also, it's very, you know, New York is great. You know, who can blame people for wanting to move, or not even just New York, but the city. You know what I mean? Like cities all over, you know? People want to live in the city, you know? The problem is when it's just too expensive for people who have been there, and then they have to leave, you know? And where do you go, you know? So I'm not a big fan of gentrification. And here in the Bronx, it's sort of like one of the last places that people actually want to live in New York, because it's really not that far from New York, you know, I mean from the city. And Brooklyn is like, it's done, pretty much. Like, it's very expensive now, you know, and it's been totally gentrified. Like, all the bad neighborhoods that nobody ever wanted to go to, you know, you can't live there now. It's just too expensive, you know.
What about Harlem?
Well, Harlem, you know, Harlem, yeah, it's the same sort of story. But I think that there are still many black people who live in Harlem just because, you know, one thing actually is like the projects. You know about the projects?
Yes.
You know, I mean, there are a lot of projects in Harlem and also in the Bronx. And that's actually something that sort of saves the neighborhood from being gentrified because, you know, the middle class, you know, people who are paying rents and whatever, even if they're high or they're not high, whatever, people who own houses and have lived in a community for 20, 30 years, those are the people that get pushed out. But people who live in projects who are like sort of subsidized by the government, you know, it's harder to move them out because, you know, it's like, well, where are they going? You know, they're not going anywhere, you know, and it's not, I'm not judging anybody. It makes absolute, you know, whatever I think, it really doesn't make any difference. It's just the way it is, you know what I mean? So because there are many projects, particularly in, you know, the Bronx and in Harlem, it's just harder to get rid of all the black people, you know, so they have to deal with it, you know. So they build like huge, nice buildings right next to the projects, and that's just the way it is.
You know, gentrification can be very ugly. I've seen it in so many different places to where there's a new crowd of people moving in, and now they feel like they can take claim of the neighborhood. And in some ways, you know, they're paying to be there, and that's how it's supposed to work out. And then you have a crowd of people who have been in the neighborhood for years. Their families and generations have come from the neighborhood, and they feel like suddenly they're being put out of a place to where they're so connected to. So there's an emotional connection that's very ugly, and an emotional detachment that happens that's very ugly. On another end, it's very imperative and important for communities, my communities, to understand the importance of maintaining your neighborhood to where it can't be gentrified. It's also important for recent college graduates to understand how important it is to move into our own communities and continue to build them up. Although the system of credit, the financial system, will automatically appraise a house as being higher value if it's in a white neighborhood than if it's in a black neighborhood. So it's been proven that the more black people you have in your community, the lower the value of your houses here in the U.S. So like the gentrification process almost sometimes seems to be inevitable when you have such poverty in a neighborhood. But also what could take place is the city could chip in, because the city donates money. Cities all over gives money to different projects in that city that you would kind of scratch your head on. Like, did they just really build a Marriott with the city's money? Like, and so that doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, or maybe it does in some way, because if the hotel is going to make money and put it back into the economy, then maybe it will make sense. But how about, it makes money and helps to improve some of the impoverished neighborhoods? So gentrification is just an ugly situation. But, like, there also has to take place some kind of education amongst my people, to where we have to understand, hey, we have to take care of our communities. And then, as much as we can, by keeping them clean, by keeping them from being overtaken by crime, by policing our own communities, and then maybe we won't lose on the gentrification side as much as we have been. I think the truth is there's not as much organizing right now as there has been in the past, in the cities and black communities of America. Like, at one point in time, the church was the centerpiece of the community, and it was kind of like the foundation. And if there was a problem, you could go to the church. People are no longer going to the church, and many people no longer see the church as the centerpiece of the community. So there are other things to where, there is an older guard that is in place, and sometimes they're not necessarily up to date on everything that's going on. Many times they think that the old way of doing things is going to fix this new situation that has arisen, which is not necessarily the case. Now the youth are organizing, they're coming together, but many times what I hear from the old guard is that they don't want to listen to the old guard. So the youth are kind of off learning and doing their own things and doing it their own way. I think what's taking place is almost a reinvention of organizing, because it's like all the pieces are back shuffled again, and we're trying to figure out how to put the pieces together, because there's so many things that are taking place, and there's so many different factions of groups working in different places that when certain issues happen where there's police brutality, that seems to pull all the groups together and get them talking and say, okay, hey, we need to figure out something together, because you've been working over there and I've been working over here, and it's actually time for us to try to pull something together. So when it becomes many times when you talk about changing policy, that's when groups realize, you know what, the only way we're going to change policy or change the law is if we actually put our resources together and fight together. So, it's this new way of organizing that's probably being birthed right now as we speak. And so here in Baltimore, the government structure and historically has been in place and has created many of the disparities between poor blacks and the rest of the city.
Excuse me, you said creating?
Yeah.
Creating.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like so here's the thing about government. Government came from some power hungry slave owners. That was the government. Right? Like sometimes we think of the government as this structure that kind of came out of nowhere and that people respect. No, what it was a group of people who owned slaves, and they built the country off of the work of the slaves. That was the original government. The government progressed to be these people's relatives and folks who had the same ideology and thought just like them. So, yes, the government created disparities. The government created slavery. So we have to remember that, and we're not too far removed from that. And I might be getting off subject, but like you have to mention mass incarceration, with the United States rate of locking people up being the highest in the world, for nonviolent crimes. That's the government. Like, we don't realize that that's the government, but that's the government. So yes, they're creating disparities. They are incarcerating people for nonviolent crimes and breaking up families for long periods of times. And when they break up families, then you start to get more families in poverty, because there are not two parents bringing in incomes. There's one parent bringing in income. And then that one parent who's trying to take care of the family, usually a single mother, is going out working 2 to 3 jobs. So there's nobody to watch the kid. So that kid becomes a latchkey kid. So now that kid is at home by themselves, and they go out and experience the streets. And the streets will swallow you whole. And so, and when you go out into the streets, guess who's waiting for you? The police and the criminal justice system, which is the government, and it's a vicious cycle.
Is like entrepreneurship. Education should be about starting a business, how to grow food, how to plant a crop, how to maybe manufacture clothes, how to produce your own clothes. I think education needs to incorporate that too. So when you go to school, you just don't learn how to read or just learn how to write or add and subtract. You learn how to manufacture. You learn how to maybe to start a business. You learn how to maybe do a financial report. You learn how to sew, become a tailor, make your own clothes, grow your own food. You learn how to repair stuff. I think that's an important part of education that more schools need to focus on. And I think that's part of being innovative. And some schools here actually have community gardens where they teach the children, they have them start their own gardens, and grow their own food. So some schools are already doing that, but I think it needs to be more.
Website for artists, and it's like a big thing now that people are really mad because they're using artists to gentrify, and it's like a whole conversation. They say like if the artists start to make a place cool, then after that, then people want to live there, and things like this, which may or may not be true, but like I said, people have to live. They have to live somewhere. You can't say, oh no, you can't live here because you can't, or we don't want to have like a Starbucks and like nice things, and I would like to have like a restaurant nearby that I could go to, so I don't have to get on the subway or drive somewhere, but if I say that, then it's like, oh, you want gentrification. It's like, no, not really, because I want to be able to afford where I live, and I already moved from Brooklyn, so I could afford a nice place, but it's a tricky thing. I think that word, that gentrification, like, it just means so many things, and a lot of people don't know what it means, Yeah. And they think it's bad, it's awful, but it's not all bad and awful, and I think that people sort of need to figure it out, and don't just be like, I hate gentrification, They need to figure it out. Like, what can we do to make it so that everybody can sort of live together? Because, even if you look out my window right there are 3 huge buildings that they just built, like, in the last year. You know, and I always laugh because I'm like, who is going to live there? But they actually had like a lottery because it's supposed to be affordable housing, whatever that means. So they have this lottery and they post it online and blah blah blah. And a friend of mine who lives in the neighborhood, he says that within 20 minutes, like it was closed, like you couldn't apply anymore. And you know, these are humongous buildings, and there are 3 of them. You know, in 20 minutes, like people had already signed up, you know, to try to get a spot. So about a couple of blocks away, there's a huge project. They're building 10 high rises, you know, so it's all over the place, and it's always harder, I think, to be reactionary. It's like, because it's like, okay, well, now what am I going to do? I have to do something as a reaction to what they did to me, you know. And if you're proactive, perhaps you can kind of frame the conversation so that you can actually get more out of it and get what you really want out of it, you know, rather than to be like, okay, well, just give me some place to live anywhere, you know, with some place that you don't want to live, you know. But now that you're homeless, you're basically going to go anywhere, you know. I mean, a lot of people from the city, from the Bronx, you know, they've been moving to like the upstate, you know.
Well,
Or down south, back down to the south, you know, North Carolina. I know quite a few people who've moved to North Carolina, South Carolina, and it's sort of like a culture shock. You know, they don't want to live there. You know, you have to drive. There's really nothing going on. You don't really know a lot of people. You know, but it is definitely cheaper because New York is very expensive. You know, it's an expensive place.
We have to kind of get back to us, and you know, we have to fight for equality within government, but at the same time, when we go back into our communities, we have to look at each other and say, hey, we're fighting for more, but this is what we have right now, and this is what we're going to work with. Because I think if we stay focused so much on somebody giving us something, like we have to fight them for them to give it to us, instead of us just obtaining it somewhere ourselves, like creating, like we have great minds, like we have some of the greatest inventors ever in the history of, you know, inventions. I think we have to go back into ourselves and see and recognize our brilliance and our resiliency. We have been through hell and we are still here. We are still here. So if we're going to use our energy to go through hell, how about we start to use our energy to experience another piece of heaven? The whole idea of organizing, I want to take organizing to a level to where it makes progress financially. It helps people to get started as far as a business. And on the other end, for those people who are in the community that aren't helping the community, we boycott those businesses silently. And then along the way, we're bringing up somebody from the community to replace that business, you know? And so, or we already have somebody in place who has it all together and say, hey, you know, because, I mean, if you think about it, McDonald's builds, Burger King builds a restaurant on this corner. Then who shows up? McDonald's across the street on another corner. That's not what we're doing in our communities. There's something that's popping up. They're not of the community, and nobody's setting up across the street saying, hey, we got better prices over here. Come over here. So, you know, there's none of that.
Ghana give is that cheating is very frowned upon in the educational system because they don't do that because the students know that they actually publish it in the paper that you were caught cheating, and not only are you going to get in trouble with your family, but then the neighbors on your way home, the teachers are going to tell the family, and the family's going to tell the neighbors, and everybody's going to know that you did this, and it's just a shame that that comes to you because of this bad thing, because now the whole community knows that you have this label on you. So it's more than just your mother or your father being able to discipline you or teach you ideas and cultures and values. It's the whole community. And that, again, unified type of education and value system is what they attribute to their success and their happiness. I believe the progress of big cities is good. It's just how you go about working in the big city. If you keep the values that you were taught and that you've learned that made you successful, then it's just a progression. And you can take that, and as the cities progress and grow, then it just becomes a more successful and more positive environment. So there's nothing against the big city or emerging. It's just that how you go about it. It's like they say, it's like money. They say money is the root of all evil, but that's not true. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil. You know, finances and progression is good. It's just how does it change you as a person? Does it make you now go away from your values that you were taught? Does it make you now do something different than what your elders were doing? And as long as you're using your financial success and the cities now give back to the communities so that everyone is growing, then it's a win-win for everybody. It doesn't, shall I say, bode well for those who can't afford to keep up with, you know, the cost of living, so to speak. So you'll have the cities building housing, building up the neighborhood, but it's not for the people that are here because they can't afford it. It's for those that are outside that have money, so now they come in and be able to afford all the benefits and all the work that's going into creating the community and making it better. But those that actually were living here before because they can't afford it, now they're being pushed out. So overall, if you look at the picture, even now in Newark, if you look at the picture of it, the city is starting to look nicer, it's starting to progress, and there's new houses and new buildings, but new opportunities, but not necessarily for the people that are here because they can't afford to live here, so they're pushed out to other neighborhoods.
People can have a cell phone in a place without electricity and water. So imagine the gap between the modernization and the real developing, like there is a natural way to develop. So imagine that you are developing slowly, like you should have, like you should develop slowly because this is the only way that you can adjust changing. So imagine that you are developing slowly and starting to see that things are changing, and you see a television set in the first time in your life, and then you're getting a cell phone. This is like, I think it makes people get crazy. Nobody knows how to deal this gap when you have like a Porsche outside of your house but you don't have electricity. And people like this, things like this happen. So I think it's very, it's something that I don't know how they can do it different. Because it's not only in Angola, but in Angola I saw it really clearly when people don't know how to read and write, for example, have a cell phone or have a car. But I think it's part of the process, and I don't know if there is another way to do that. The process of taking out homeless people from main cities, this is capitalism. Like I can say, wow, this is really sad when you take out poor people that are people, they just don't have money, and you put them out from the city because the city have to be perfect and clean and beautiful. This is kind of an illusion.
I grew up in a household most of the time without my father. My parents split when I was about 12, and after they separated, life was kind of difficult with my mother and my younger sister, and I kind of had to be the man of the house, and we moved around a lot, not because we wanted to, but because my mother couldn't afford the rent, or maybe she mismanaged money, but there were lots of times where she just didn't have the cash to pay the bills. And so we would move into another apartment, get threatened with eviction, move to another apartment, go back to grandma's house, live in the basement, find another house, get kicked out of there. So it was a process that went back and forth and back and forth. And I just looked at that type of life and was like, I don't know how I'm going to live when I get older, but it's not going to be like this at all. And I saw my mother struggling. I don't think, obviously, she wanted to raise us in that type of environment. But she was a young mother, and she was trying to figure it out as I was trying to figure it out.